Hey, welcome to Unlatched Mind. My guests today, actually, I have two guests on today, Gary Bernhard and Kalman Glantz. I found Gary and Kalman over at psychologytoday.com. They co-author a blog titled "Evolution in Daily Life." They just kind of piece apart, the human evolution, how it, and just they kind of dissect all its effects on our daily life, all little aspects of our daily life, and one of the articles I had found that I particularly liked was they talked about basically the title was the article was Why Socialism Fails. Had a great conversation, really enjoyed it. Anyway, let's just jump in. I give you Gary and Cal. So Gary, Cal, thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciate it. So before we jump in, I think we had sent a bunch of emails prior, and I looked through a bunch of your blogs, and you had done one on socialism and kind of the psychology around it, and you know you didn't take a there's no really no political stance you took in the article, so I really appreciated the fact that you were just trying to understand some of the tenets of socialism, the pros and cons, how can it be successful, why can't it, and you kind of took that kind of evolutionary psychology perspective on the whole thing. So we'll try to not be political in this conversation, but no guarantees, right? But before we jump in, maybe can you guys just give a little background, a little bio of yourselves. Maybe I don't know. Start with Gary. We'll go from there.
Well, I've been involved in education for, well, since the mid 70s, since 1974. Um, and it's always been, um, interestingly enough, it's always been alternative education.
Hmm.
And I was the one of the founders and then became the director of an alternative school in Fitchburg, Massachusetts in the 70s. And it really worked well. We had some tough kids in the program. It was um, a program for high school dropouts and for kids who had been in trouble with the law. And so we created a alternative program that really worked. It was all voluntary. The kids didn't have to go. There were no grades. There was no set curriculum. If they
Hmm.
decided they wanted to get a GED, then we could help them do that. And when I left there and came out to the University of Massachusetts, I got into a doctoral program and was really interested in trying to figure out why what we did worked, since none of the people who founded the program had any um, training in education. I'd never taken an education course, and it worked really well.
Hmm.
We got 175 plus kids their GEDs in a matter of 4 years. So I was
Wow.
really
Neat.
interested in that. I couldn't, the the easy answer is, oh, we're such cool people, but
Yeah.
but that wasn't very satisfying. And so about that time, Cal was doing a lot of reading in human evolution and
Hmm.
was thinking a lot about how it pertained to uh, psychotherapy, and he'll talk about that in a minute. But I got turned on through Cal to reading about human evolution and made some connections between the way children learn, well, primate young learn, and then children in hunter-gatherer societies learn, and realized that what we had done in the alternative school was allow natural learning to take place with the kids in the program. And as long as it wasn't school, as long as it wasn't mandatory, they loved to learn. And of
Hmm.
course,
Interesting.
kids all over the world learn through observation, imitation, exploration, trying things out, uh, and and so my dissertation was about that. And then I wrote a book called Primates in the Classroom after that, which was a takeoff from the dissertation. And it's about how schools are often run contrary to natural learning processes in children. So that got me going on this. And then Cal and
Very good.
I have been working together on what might be called the meaning of human evolution for us today. for almost 40 years now. So that's about what brings us up to, we're still doing it.
Yeah, interesting. Now, Cal, how about yourself? I mean, I know Gary kind of gave pulled you into that bio. Anything else you want to add from your own perspective? Or
Well, I'm a retired psychotherapist, and
mm,
when I was getting my Ph.D., I was interested. It was the time of the sociobiology wars, so I was really interested in the connections between evolution and psychotherapy. And I wrote what I think is the first book on that has an approach to psychotherapy that's compatible with evolution. And again, I've been working in that vein for many years since then.
hmm, interesting. Okay. Very cool, guys. So now jumping in, you had I assume you co-wrote the blog, or I guess it doesn't really matter. It seems like the blog I'm referring to is the on psychologytoday.com. That's where I ran across some of your work. It seems like do you co-write? Sounds like you guys co-write most of those blogs together. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, we do.
got it, got it. So I guess the title of the blog is "Why Socialism Fails," right? So obviously, that immediately it automatically has a political spin to it. But again, that was not your agenda there. But now you looked at this. You both had looked through this or made this, I'd say declaration through again through your lens, the evolutionary lens, and as to making a case for why it really can't work in its current, in the current form that you at least were defining in the article itself. So, I guess maybe just lay out, you know, when we say socialism, there's democratic socialism, there's social democracy. There's a lot of different spins on what socialism is, and again, it gets political. But in terms of your article, you were referring to socialism as defined by what?
Well, socialism, it's hard to say what it's defined by because people use it in so many different ways. In
Mm-hmm.
America, for example, we think of the Russian system, the Soviet system, as communism, but actually it's the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics,
Right.
and they think of it as socialism. So uh, I think the fundamental core of socialism is ownership of the means of production.
Mm-hmm.
Is the government owns the means of production, the factories, and so on and so forth, and people work for the government. I think
Right.
that's the defining quality
Mm-hmm.
characteristic.
Right. Now, if you pull in, when we say Marxism or Stalinism or, Maoism, those all those isms fit this description, or because obviously there's a
That's
trip.
what they mean.
Okay.
That
Right.
they
Right.
they mean ownership of the means of production.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's really quite different from what people sometimes call countries like the Netherlands and Denmark, for example, socialist. They're social democracies, and while the government has probably more influence in the economies of those countries and in the life of the lives of the people
Mm-hmm.
in those countries, it's certainly not. They don't own the means of production
Mm.
in the same way.
There are
Right. Right. Right.
capitalist economies that have governments that do a lot, intervene a lot to protect the poor, to make things a little bit more equal or more fair. But they're not socialism. So
Right.
the parties are called social democrat parties. That's an,
Mm.
but that's not socialism. So
Right.
that's
Right.
certainly
Right.
not
Right.
what we're calling socialism.
Right.
Right. Gotcha. So just the strict definition of the government's owning the means of production. That's kind of what we're baselining here. So, well, so you guys lay out, and I appreciate that description because you hear all the time. What about the Nordic countries? And well, we're sort of socialist because you get in a sense already. Because look at the post office, look at welfare, and there is some safety net for folks that traditionally capitalist nations like the United States have employed. And
Yeah, well, the right wing in the United States calls any kind of social measure like Medicaid or something socialism. That's what but that's an epithet. That's something that they're just
right,
Yeah.
to
right.
criticize.
And like anything, I think there very few things in life are binary, right? It's pretty much there's nuance to everything. So there's some, so it's, but when you get political, you have to make it binary to make a point, and then all logic just falls by the wayside. But we, we won't jump into there just yet. So you guys make a case for, how while the general tenets and I'd say genesis of some of the socialism ideas are noble, right? And if you really look at them, they are, right. Just the quote unquote evils that some would say that of capitalism, the weak sort of are left behind, and you kind of get the accrual of wealth to very few, given the vast population. Socialism kind of claims to fix all that. So you guys kind of lay out, well, while the goals of socialism are noble, it just there's principles that aren't really being considered when it comes to actually implementing them, and so basically, and you guys can take this evolutionary perspective as to why it really can't work or why it fails. So just kind of lay out what we're talking about there. Lay out, I guess, and this is kind of the summary of the beginning of the article, but.
I think, first of all, equality and freedom were characteristic of human life when we were hunter-gatherers, before we invented agriculture and ownership of property and things like that. So that's a deep human craving for equality and for freedom both. But to have a government try to impose it and force it down people's throats, that we don't think is going to work, because it kind of ignores the freedom part. So I think
Well,
that might sum it up.
and the other aspect of it is that in hunter-gatherer societies, people couldn't accumulate wealth. They couldn't accumulate power. They really are non-hierarchical societies. And so it was very important for people to work together, for people to cooperate and collaborate in order to survive. And that situation doesn't pertain anymore.
I
It's
think it's important, Gary, I think it's important to note that the reason they couldn't is because they didn't have any means to do it. They didn't have any tools to do it.
right.
You couldn't. You
And they were,
physically couldn't. There was no way to do it.
that's right.
No stored surplus. So once you have a stored surplus, in other words, money or some form of money, wealth, then it's a very different situation. Then you have to prevent people from acquiring it, and that's where it stops working.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you guys talk about. You kind of gave an example of Sifu. Am I pronouncing that right? In the
Yes.
forest people. Yeah, yeah. Give that example, because I think that kind of sums up what you both had just talked about. But maybe, yeah, if you want to just kind of summarize that that
Well,
analogy you gave.
it's a really interesting story in Colin Turnbull's book, The Forest People. And this is a guy who was the head of fairly large family, an older guy, um, and the way that the Mbuti and these are groups in the Ituri forest in the Congo. The way that they hunt is that the children and the women circle around, drive the animals towards these nets that the men have set up, and they set them up in a line. And of course, the food is all shared. The meat, at least, is all shared, and so there's no real advantage to putting your net out in front of the other ones. But this guy Sefu did that, and he got caught by the other hunters, and they really laid into him. I mean, they said, if you're such a big chief and you think you have the right, to put your nets out in advance of the others, then why don't you go live with, the Herero who have chiefs? We don't have chiefs here. And so he broke down in tears and promised to give all the meat that he had acquired away, and immediately people went over to his hut and took all the meat out. They really let him have it. And so this whole idea of equality and cooperation was central to these societies. They couldn't exist if someone is going to be a cheater like that. And
Hmm.
so there are all kinds of mechanisms that human beings evolved to detect uh, cheating and lying and things like that. So that's that's how it works, or it worked for 98% of our history as a species.
Hmm. Yeah, and one thing, and I think I had sent this in the notes I had sent you guys was n- now that's with that was and what time period are we talking about here? Just to kind of scope out,
Well,
this
Turnbull wrote the
give me the
book in the early
timeline.
'60s, so he was living with the Mbuti in the '50s,
Okay,
1950s.
wow. Okay, so this is okay. So recent. I mean, relative recent in terms
Yeah.
of our
Well,
history, but
they were
okay.
survivors from a previous age, basically.
Mm, yeah, yeah. And one thing that struck me was well, now that's within. I assume all that is within a tribe, right? That was
Within a band. Yeah.
a band. Okay, so
Within a
it's a
single
proper. Okay,
band. Yeah.
got it. Okay, now what I and I kind of took the notes. I'm thinking, well, we've also evolved to survive, right? So between bands, I would say, and when I say band versus tribe, what's the difference there? What,
A band
Or-
is a small group of mostly relatives and in-laws
gotcha.
that functions together.
Okay.
And it's much smaller than a tribe, maybe 50 people, roughly 50,
Okay.
100 people.
Okay. Yeah. So obviously they'd want to work together to for the betterment and the survival of the family of the band. How does that work between groups, right? Because between groups, I would think that guy would want to steal all the food from the other group because he wants his family to survive. How does we tie that into this
There's
narrative?
no
I guess.
storage of food, so there's nothing to steal,
Yeah,
basically.
there's no reason to steal anything from anybody because you're nomadic and you just have to lug all that stuff around if you
Right.
did get it. But there's a fascinating story also in Turnbull's book about the what might be called the use of xenophobia to keep the group together. Um, One guy came running into camp once and he shouted to everyone. Oh, I should back up a little bit. The same guy, Sefu, had had a fight with some of the other guys and had moved his group away maybe a couple hundred yards from the main group. And so this guy comes running in and he says, everybody get your bows and arrows and follow me because the bad Mbuti have come into our territory and they're going to steal our honey. And so so he says, and somebody go get Sefu because we need them too. And so Turnbull got really nervous. It was going to be in the middle of a war. And so he talks to his informant, and the informant says, "Oh, pay no attention to him. He's always doing stuff like this. We never fight. They come in, they go through our territory, we go through their territory. We never really get close enough. But what the goal was to get Sefu back and his people back with the band, and
Mm,
it was successful. Now, this is not to say that there weren't some friction, some kinds of frictions between hunter-gathering groups, but mostly they had to do not with trying to acquire wealth, but with settling a score. If somebody got into a fight or killed somebody from another tribe, then a group of people would um, band together and then go get revenge.
mm,
Uh, but there was no, as far as we can tell, there was no war, you know, massive warfare among these groups, um, and there was probably more violence inside a band than between bands.
interesting. So it sounds like without the ability to store resources, there's really it almost keeps greed at bay because why would I if I'm going to kill an animal or grab all this food and I can't storing it can't store it, it's going to go bad, it's going and I got to carry it. So it sounds like
Exactly.
without the means of storage acquire and grow or accrue, whatever you want to call it. That's an interesting dynamic. I never thought of that. And you fast forward to today, where the whole point is to unfortunately just to acquire and store and build wealth and whatever else
Right.
people can acquire.
And money is quintessentially portable.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
Especially nowadays, where it doesn't even represent anything. It's a digital. It's a bit in a computer
Exactly.
somewhere.
Mhm.
It's not even a thing.
And that need to consume um, something that was like meat that would go bad, also I think is connected with the fact that meat was always shared in hunter gatherer bands, and so because it couldn't be, preserved.
Hmm.
So everybody got something if anyone got an animal.
To go back to socialism, if you look at the emotion, what sustained equality in a hunter-gatherer band was the emotion. So, first of all, envy, greed, anger. If somebody tried to cheat you, all those emotions would come into play. Somebody tried to take too much meat, those emotions would come into play
Hmm.
and prevent that person from doing it. When you talk socialism today, you don't have the emotions doing that. You have government doing it, trying to enforce it. So that's where it starts to break down and become
Mm-hmm.
um,
Right.
totalitarian.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting kind of corollary from when how you guys open and you a little bit about your bio, how you were almost. I just see a corollary in my head from like teaching, and when it's forced upon the kids,
Mm.
and it's from a centralized place. Maybe this is the book, you got to learn it, sit down. It doesn't go well, and then you kind of tapped into the general, maybe say, emotions of how the kids learned, and it seemed to work a lot better. I see a kind of a corollary between that and what we're talking about here, and how these forces at play and these emotions at play, they work naturally, but then when you have a government trying to enforce the whole thing, it seems to break down. It seems like a weird. I didn't connect all the dots in my head yet, but it's kind of as you guys are talking, I'm making notes. Like it's just interesting, that
Well,
corollary.
a good example is the curriculum frameworks that a lot of states impose on teachers and on kids. Uh, Everyone is going to learn the same stuff at the same time, and they're
In the
going
same
to
way. Yep.
split kids up into age grade groups, and that's based on what we've learned about how kids learn, how children learn. That is a complete um, it undermines the natural learning that is sort of encoded, in what it means to be human.
Mm. Yeah, that's a little scary to think that that's, but I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess it is what it is at this point. I mean, that's a little outside the scope of what we're talking about, but
Yeah.
so I guess bringing it back a little bit, so now some would say, well, socialism has never worked because, I mean, there's some of these quotes. Real socialism has never been tried. You hear that moniker out there, meaning every time you see it out there, it's failed. It was just because it was implemented wrong, or the idea was right, but it was never just properly executed. The
Sounds like an
defenders.
excuse to me.
Yeah, I mean, if you and so I'm googling this in preparation for this, and of course I'm landing into political landmines everywhere. With depending on the website, I had to look at you have to look at the URL that you hit to see what angle they're going to have on socialism versus. But I was watching a lot of this capitalism versus socialism debates and YouTube and things like that, and I did hear a common theme through when the capitalist points to says, well, it's never worked, so why do you guys keep doubling down on this thing? It does never worked. And then the rebuttals are usually in some manner, or some form, are always, well, it was never implemented correctly, and or the idea was right, like I said. What is there any what is your perspective on that? Is there any truth there, or is that just, like you said, just a
Well,
crappy excuse?
that perception that it's never worked. I mean, it's never been implemented correctly. Um, Underneath that is the assumption that bad characters have gotten control of it, like Stalin, like Mao, and so
Hmm.
and uh, but the problem is that without the control of the natural environment it can't work because there are so many opportunities for people to aggrandize themselves, to get
Right.
wealth, to get power.
Right.
And so it's
and
not
money.
just a few bad apples that make it untenable.
Yeah, I mean, I always look at it again. Just I think I had said this in my notes as well. Is generally speaking, you put too much power in in a group of people. I don't see how those group of people are going to be the exceptions to humanity, where they're just going to stay pure and only have the greater good of the people in mind. They're going to start. They're going to again going back to our you can't acquire wealth, you can't acquire power now, you can't acquire all the things you can store. Going back to our original analogy, so those people, the government, the leadership, whatever you want to say, I just don't trust that they're not going to take more and more and more until, again, like you guys had said in the article, tyranny is what sort of where things end up. I just don't see any exceptions to that, and I don't think history is. I
That
think history
seems to
supported
be
that.
what history tells us.
Right. Exactly. Right. Right. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, are there anything that from? I mean, obviously, you guys take this. You understand how humans think, right? Like, and then you look through all this through that lens. Is there any way? I mean, I guess I'll just ask: are you more capitalist? I mean, that's not a perfect system, obviously, but it's done a damn good job, I'd say, in up till the current time. Are there some, you know, is there some happy medium that we're missing here, or what I mean, what if you're in office tomorrow, it's the Gary and Cal White House. What, what what would you be? What,
That's very funny, Vinny.
Yeah. Cal, you can be president.
No, 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 Gary, you be president.
who the hell wants that job? Yeah, exactly. um, you guys already don't fit in that domain. You don't want the power, but is there any I mean, policy according to you all would be what? Is there anything you could recommend? I mean,
Well, I think if people understood the history of the species, if they understood how the species evolved and how things are supposed to work biologically, then we might be able to do better. I mean, but you know, it's a question of patching. It's a question of you know finding solution to the solution that you just created. What we
mm,
have in human history is a series of unintended consequences, like climate change.
Yeah.
And so now we have to deal with the changed climate. It's patching. We're going to try to find solutions to problems as they arise. That creates more problems. We find solutions. Who knows how that's going to end?
mm,
And one of the things that we've been doing a lot of thinking about is that capitalism has really had a lot of achievements. It's pulled an enormous number of people out of poverty. It's given opportunities, but it's also created massive inequality.
mm,
And so if if we're looking for something that might pull us a little more closely into um, the evolution that the species has gone through, there might be a possibility of directing capitalism towards human and community goals. Um, for example, and this is something that Cal started working on years ago, and that I worked on with him for a while. Um, uh, Advertising. If a if we all agreed that things that destroy the environment or contributed to the destruction of the environment couldn't be advertised, or uh, if you advertise such products, you couldn't write them off as business expenses.
mm,
Um, that might help if, for example, cars that got less than 40 miles a gallon couldn't be advertised, uh, then maybe they wouldn't be as popular as they are. Or they could advertise them, but they they couldn't they couldn't write them off as business expenses. But
Mm,
of course, that implies a whole, you know, watchdog governmental process that a lot of people would bridle at.
sure. I mean, it's basically another. It's a long way of saying additional regulation, right? Right. Which
Yes.
but but the government uses regulation or should all the time for the right things, right? I mean, you have to have emissions testing for cars in most states, or some states not. There are things that regulations are supposed to do to keep us from really going a little too crazy, right? So it is that really kind of that I guess that pendulum as to where does it really land, without squashing the individual, the entrepreneurship and all the other stuff that
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Yep.
truly in favor of, and I think most of us should be. The good part of capitalism is, if I wake up early and work my butt off, I'm going to be able to provide a whole heck of a lot of stuff for my family and my, and hopefully society. But there's got to be checks and balances. So there's, it is that pendulum. There's no perfect answer, but
Right.
I don't know. Um,
Well, I think one of the problems particular to the United States is that we put so much emphasis here on individual freedom, and so when the government says, "Look, we really have to get control of pollution,"
Or wear masks.
yeah,
You
or
have to
where
wear masks. People bridle.
how dare you tell me
you
what to do?
can't tell me
Right.
that I have
That's
to
the
wear a mask. I mean, it's even even if
right.
it's for the community good.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
here's an example. I mean, we have a Bill of Rights in the United States. We don't have a Bill of Responsibilities or a Bill of
Mm,
Duties. And so,
right.
it's we if we had something like that that could be enforced, which I don't know how, but I mean it's it's so skewed to individual freedom uh,
Hmm.
in this country that it's really hard to get anything done on a large scale community basis.
Yeah. 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 Um, and I think we talked about this, when we had our original chat, it's and where I don't, where I don't know where this is going to go is because, in this, you talk about how we've evolved, and the time scale of our biological evolution is in the order of, hundreds of thousands of years, and this, between our psyche and our physical body, and how we, whatever, the food thing we talked about, and how we interact with other humans, and the tribal nature of our just species, and then you kind of fast forward, you get to the agricultural cultural revolution that just changes everything about how we, eat, make food, store food, survive, share food. And then you go even further to, and that, I would say, that's in the order of like decades in the time scale. Then you fast forward to, today, and with technology, the time scale is in, months or maybe years, even a couple of years here and there. Oh, there's new technologies out that's going to change how we communicate, right? The internet, social media. But our our biology is still thinking it's 100,000 years ago, and where it's like all these things are hacking how we interact. It's like, how how do you, like, from an evolutionary perspective, you guys know, and poke holes in what I just said, but certainly to start there. But how do what are some things we can do, whether it's arguing about socialism versus capitalism, or are there some things that this the this evolutionary understanding can inform, whether it's how we interact on social media and the internet? I mean, is there, how our political divide is? I mean, we could not be more divided, I don't think, minus a civil war. But what's I don't know, are you hopeful where where we're headed, like, if you look at the
Uh, that's a tough question, Vinny. Um, I think that we could be hopeful, um, but I really do think that we don't understand ourselves very well
yeah.
as a species. We really don't know where all these things come from. I mean, we spent all this time in non-hierarchical hunter-gatherer bands, but as soon as agriculture came along, an earlier desire, which is hierarchy and dominance, came right back to the surface. And individuals could aggrandize themselves, they could get wealth and power, they could attack others. It became a very male dominated society, which is really quite unlike most of the hunter gatherer societies we know about.
Mm.
So it's tough. I mean, I think that we've had real trouble convincing people uh, that humans evolved.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah, yeah. Well, that's another thing too. I mean, you get a whole sect of folks that would just think that the world is 5,000 years old, and so that you just kind of throw this whole dialogue out the window if you have that perspective. But I'm thinking most folks aren't in that camp, but then actually think we've evolved to some extent. I mean, define extent, but uh, yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough
yeah,
one.
it is.
But
It's a tough question. Here's just one example. We identified something that we call the foraging assumption, and this is related to the environment. And we call it the foraging assumption because our hunter-gatherer ancestors just took whatever they could find
yeah,
in the
right.
environment, whether it was meat or whether it was plants or um, and uh, and that was fine for them because they had a pretty light footprint. There are some studies that suggest that hunting in North America, um, made large animals like the mastodon extinct, but there's not a whole lot of evidence for that. And for the most part, when they'd move on to another place, and where they were, if they had had any kind of imprint, it just recovered. But that that's within us. That's inside us as a species,
Mm.
in our genes. And so, as we got more sophisticated technologically, we kept that hunter-gatherer notion that whatever's out there is ours for the taking. And of course, that was reinforced by things like, in the Bible, God giving dominion over the earth to human beings.
Mm.
And so it's, we've got to, if we could get over that and say, well, dominion has been great. It's really given us a lot of benefits, but look what it's done to the environment,
Mm.
um, and take some responsibility for that. But it's hard to get across.
Yeah. Now, this selfishness, though, it is because that's one thing as I was going through, your blog, it, it, you kind of make you guys had made the original like point where you know, we have what I think you called it the origin of the craving for equality, right? That and we talked through some of those examples with the Sefu and use that as an example, but the selfishness and the I want and I'm going to store and I'm going to keep all this stuff, right? And acquire it. Haven't we also evolved for that as it, or maybe not, but I
No,
almost
of course we have.
like for
Those
survival,
are
right?
all the drive to survival
Right,
and reproduction. We have to take care of ourselves. We have
right,
to watch out for ourselves. Otherwise, we just disappear from the face of the earth, as so many others have.
right,
Um,
right,
so that's built in to us.
right. Yeah. So how do we? So isn't there a dichotomy between okay, my Vinny's biology, like everyone else's that was saying, is programmed to be selfish and to I need to grab as much food as I can, which now in current day it's as much money and properties, houses, cars, whatever. We don't, the things that are not necessary for survival. There's no line anymore. It just kind of goes. How, how do we, if that's kind of how we're programmed, how could anything besides a system that just enables greed kind of work? Like in other words, in a perfect world, I would, I would make a bunch of money and I'd give as much as I could away, and I'd have a lot less for myself or for my family. I should just be like, well, I'm there. Everyone's eating, everyone's happy. We don't have a lot of stuff, but who cares? I'm giving as much as I can away. And if everyone did that, it's just kind of this giant circle of kumbaya happiness, right? But it doesn't seem like that's, that's,
We're not designed to do that.
yeah,
No.
right, right. Yeah. So
We
that's
are designed to cooperate. We are designed to help others,
right.
and that goes on too.
Mm,
But
Depending on the circumstances. So
depending on the circumstances, right? If it's at our personal expense, it happens a lot less.
right, right, right. I don't know. I don't have my.
look,
Yeah.
to sum it up, Vinny, we're adapted. All these impulses that we have, the selfish impulses, the community impulses,
Yep.
they're adapted to work in a given environment. And that environment is one that does not
Not.
have the means to store value,
Mm,
money, or
right.
and otherwise. Once you put those same impulses into an environment where you can aggrandize yourself, where you can accumulate, where you can take more than you need, people will do it.
Right.
So we're stuck with that nature, and we've got to design the environment in a way that minimizes the damage.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so in essence, what you just said was, and let me tell me if I summarize this right. We've adapted to be here, but in an environment that does not exist today. So it's like there's a mismatch between literally our actual genome and our biology and our current reality.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's yeah. Now
That,
it's you would almost hope folks like like I think I said in one of the notes I had sent you, should politicians have like evolutionary psychologists on staff to some degree? And I kind of wrote it almost like, it's almost sounds like a joke, but it's almost like and maybe they do, I don't know, but there almost should be folks that are trying to understand and help inform policy should have some of the perspective that we're talking about today. I almost feel like with that
that
if
would be
without that
nice.
yeah, I mean,
Sure. Sure. That would be great. Uh, but I don't know if that's going to happen, Vinny.
no,
Yeah.
yeah,
Let's say you did get in the current circumstances. Let's say you did get a a philosopher king, an evolutionist king. Uh, if that uh, way of functioning didn't succeed, it would be driven out of existence, right? You'd
right,
have
right,
the more ruthless people would rule.
right.
So it's hard to imagine fixing the situation.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I guess just to go back to the socialistic society, topic more targeted. Have there been any examples in your perspective that have worked, are working? I know we talked about the Norway model, and as opposed to the Stalin Marxist kind of
Yeah,
perspective.
social democracy is probably the best thing we can do right now. That is
Hmm.
a capitalist system with a lot of safeguards and programs for the people who aren't among the quickest and fastest and most
Hmm.
useless.
To minimize inequality,
Yeah,
Yeah.
and also to focus on um, preserving the environment,
Right.
yeah,
and that
that's
can
a
be,
good one.
yeah, that can be done. It's harder to do in America because of our past history and the emphasis on individual freedom. Um,
Right.
I have a Dutch friend who is retired now, but she paid almost 60% of her income in taxes. And I said, "My goodness, isn't that just crazy? I mean, how do you?" And she said, "Well, you know, we get all kinds of great things. We get a great education. Our parks are taken care of. The people are looking out for the environment. And so it's a completely different mindset that
Hmm.
it's not just me. It's just not what I'm going to get, but it's also what is my community getting out of
Right.
this.
No, that's assuming it's managed well and you're getting back what's going in, and that's always the problem, right?
Right.
I don't trust the U.S. government's going to do anything. You know, I, they do some things well with money, but not a lot. I mean, there's not a good track record of money coming into the U.S. government and it being
That's
really
right.
executed efficiently. And so as Americans, we're of the mindset, well, I will keep it and I'm going to do what I want to do with my money. If I blow it all and ruin it, that's on me. But I just don't. And I mean, frankly, I'm right in that mindset. I've been working with the government for a couple of decades now. I wish that was different. And
Mhm.
if there was a system, and maybe Dutch friend has they have a different perspective and different results. Perhaps
Mhm.
it's just more efficient. But I just flipping a switch today and upping everyone's taxes from whatever 30 to 60% here in the U.S. I just don't think would work at all, unfortunately, without some major underpinnings that would have to change.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think part of the problem is size, and another part is diversity.
diversity, yeah, I was going to
I
say,
live in a
yep,
small town. It has about 1,500 people in it. We pay pretty high taxes because there aren't any businesses in the
mm,
town, so it's all property tax. And I know exactly where our taxes go
mm,
because we have a town meeting and we go over the budget and everyone's involved and you know, um, and then we vote and people have to abide by the results of the vote. So
right,
in my little hometown, I feel very good about paying taxes.
right, right, right.
The next step up is the state. Some things I feel good about, some things, and then when we get to the federal government, I'm like you, Benny.
Yeah, yeah,
I have no idea where it's going or
right.
who's responsible.
Yeah, no, that's a good analogy. I like that. Yeah, and with the Dutch countries versus us, yeah, the diversity is completely different between us. The size completely different. So that's the efficiency of how money's managed is definitely a function of those two things for sure. Um,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Hmm.
And one of the problems that these social democracies in Europe are having now is that they work really well in a mostly homogeneous society, um, but there's a lot of friction when they have a lot of immigrants who come with different uh, social norms and different
You're right.
mores and
Right.
uh,
Different
and
priorities. Yeah.
and so there's a lot of struggle going on now in Europe as people try to figure out how to apply the social democracies that they've evolved to plural societies.
Right, right, right. Yeah, the days of folks coming into a country, and assimilation used to be a very important thing. I still believe it is, but maybe we're entering in a new era. Back in the day, folks came to a certain country. I'll just use the U.S. for an example. It's probably the biggest and best example, and you assimilated to the values here, and if the value because that's what you were coming here for, you would assume. So assimilation should be a good thing. It doesn't mean you check your cultural norms and a lot of the stuff that your upbringing, your native country. You don't check that at the door, but there's certain things you aspire to, and when you come here, you take that on as your new norm. And then that kept things on rails to some degree, I'd say. And now it's considered, it's there's all these isms, and if you even say that, you sound like you're a racist or this or that is, and I think that's all BS. But it's a new problem. And I think we're here, so I don't think we can say, oh, everyone's got to go back to assimilating to what the values were in the 50s. We're past that, right? So I think now um, we're in a more diverse. Now it's just a globe, it's just a world, right? That's why I like to look at it. The countries and the borders now with travel and air flight, and who knows what type of immediate travel will be available in 50 years, 100 years. We're going to be one globe, one human species, and probably, and of course, beyond that, we start with whatever Elon Musk is going to do next, right? We're going to, assuming we're just on one planet, we're going to be just one people. So
Yep.
we got to figure out how to survive as one people, the human species. It's just I don't know.
Well, we wrote
Yeah,
a book.
a lot of people think that's some kind of utopia, but how would you feel if there was one government that was located, say, in Uganda or southern India that was responsible for you?
Oh yeah, no, I don't like that one world order concept. I certainly didn't mean government when I said that. I mean more like, in other words, okay, your culture is X, my culture is Y. We need to just get along somehow. I definitely think that the borders are super important. But I just we're not in this world anymore where, well, I mean, some countries have strong borders and they just no one comes in or out, right? And those don't seem to be places people want to go. But so
No.
I don't know where, yeah.
Well, a few years ago, we wrote a book called Beyond Diversity, and it's actually a curriculum for to um, to that educators can implement to show students what it means to be a human being.
Mm,
And of course, we start with the hunter gatherers, and then we identify a series of themes that are common to all cultures in the world. And the idea is that if kids could learn this as part of their formal education, they'd have a much clearer sense of what it means, to have evolved as a human being, and
mm,
how how that knowledge can help our interaction with people who are different.
right, right. Interesting. Hmm. What's the name of it? Beyond Diversity?
Beyond diversity, yeah.
Hmm. Very
And
cool.
it's really, and the subtitle is "What All Kids Have in Common."
Right, right, right. Well, I mean, if you want to get, you almost get corny, right? You look at all the bigotry and the folks just not getting along because people look different, sound different. From one perspective, I'm saying I feel like there's an evolutionary concept to that as well, right? If someone came into the band or tribe that looked completely different, sounded completely different, there was probably some threat there back in the day. I imagine. Is that? I mean,
Well, I think that outsiders are certainly, you know, looked at with some caution anyway. I
right,
mean,
right,
most hunter gatherers that we know of, uh, the name for what they called themselves was either the people or the human beings. And so anybody who wasn't one of the people wasn't quite a person or wasn't quite a human being. And so there's
yeah,
a certain built-in um, xenophobia almost.
right, right, right. Right. But that goes back to, again, understanding our evolution and understanding, hey, that feeling you get if you see something that looks different, don't embrace it and realize that person's probably has nothing, zero threat to you at all. They kiss their children at night. They laugh when their children do something stupid. They think fart jokes are funny. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this
Yep.
basic things as humans, we're just kind of, there's a common denominator between all of us. That it's just, but there's some differences too that we can't ignore. I mean, but like anything else, there's nuance everywhere, and folks just hit a binary switch and like, are you on my side? Are you on that side? And then we fight
Yeah.
online.
Then I think being able to focus on, on themes that cut across all cultures might be helpful
Yeah.
in helping people enlarge what Cal and I call enlarge the we,
Mm,
so that the band gets larger and larger, and who we are um, can include diversity.
right. 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 Yep. Yep. Well, guys, we went about an hour here. I appreciate your time. Like I said, so you guys obviously you're still current on your Psychology Today blogs. So
Oh
I
yeah,
guess where could folks find you? What books, like you said, kind of reiterate some of the books you have out. What else you guys are working on? Things like that. What do you want to leave the listeners with?
well, we don't have a web page. We probably should, but we if somebody were to Google us, they would find our books. We have some,
Either of us.
yeah, we have ebooks that we self publish that are out there too.
Okay. Okay, very cool. Yeah, and I'll include obviously the link to your blog and a few of the links I find. I'll publish them in the show notes so folks can just find them pretty quickly. So, well, Gary, Cal, I really appreciate it. Like I said, this was a. Oh, go ahead, Cal. Sorry.
Nothing. I was just going to say how much I enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, cool. Say
Yeah.
ditto. I love
Thanks
having
for
these
having me,
conversations.
Vinny. It's
Oh,
just really been a pleasure.
appreciate all the work you guys are doing. And like I said, I'll look you up again, and we'll take another take on this whole thing.
Great.
Great.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a great rest of your Sunday.
You too.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
He was well.
Yeah.
Wear that mask. See you guys.
Bye-bye.